fraud and the auditor's responsibility in this regard, right? The fraud and the auditor's responsibilities in this regard. So in this chapter, we are also going to cover essay 240, which is regarding the auditor's responsibilities, right? The auditor's responsibilities relating to fraud in an audit of financial statements, right? So this is the name of the chapter and this is the name of the standard that we covered in this chapter. What is the name of the standard? The auditor's responsibilities. Have you written? Right then. They think they are doing some favor by sitting in the class. Doesn't make a difference at all to ICAI, to me, to any person on earth. Say you have to make 1 kg vegetable, or say vegetable for 4 people, 3 people or so. Right? How much salt you put? You don't know? No PJ, no professional judgment? Half spoon, little bit, little bit. On an average, like say this much of vegetable I want to make. How much salt I need to put? Yes. Is that much salt required? Without that entire vegetable also no taste. But this much vegetable I want to make and then I take this much salt and put it into it. No. So how much of whatever you do or you say or so, it should be like salt, right? Not over. Right? Not right. Okay. Right? Fraud and the auditor's responsibility in this regard. And we discussed the essay 240. The auditor's responsibilities relating to fraud in an audit of the financial statements. An exclusive standard talking about the responsibilities of the auditor in relation to the fraud. Right. We have already had a reference regarding fraud in our clause 11 of the CARO, right? Any fraud on the company or any fraud by the company by its office noticed or reported during the year. If yes, the nature and amount involved is to be indicated, right? Then whether any fraud reporting has been done to the central government under 143.12 in form ADT 4, and whether the auditor has considered the whistleblower complaints received by the company during the year, right? So that was clause 11 ABC of the CARO. And then we also have the section 143.12. What is the 143.12? The duty to report the fraud to CG, right? The duty to report the fraud to the CG, that is to the central government. Is it clear to all of you? Right. So the auditor's responsibilities relating to fraud in an audit of financial statements, right? So whatever chapters we are studying, all are 5-mark categories. You understand? No. Automated environment, analytical procedures, audit sampling, fraud. Again, fraud, MCQ, 1 or 2, correct, incorrect, 1. And then after that in the theory part, 1 theory question, either 4 mark or 3 mark. Right? So 5 to 7 marks could be the weightage of this particular chapter. Now what happens if the question comes in the theory part of the paper? It comes in correct, incorrect also. It comes in MCQ also, right? So now what happens over there? Theory marks say 4 marks, then correct, incorrect is always 2 marks, and MCQ could be 2 marks or 1 mark, right? And they could be asking, like, you know, I told you the other day about peer review. The work of one CA being reviewed by another CA. This is one chapter which is there in CA final. Again, you know what is the weightage of, in CA final also 30 marks MCQ and 70 marks theory. So in the 70 marks of the theory paper, in the 70 marks of the theory paper, what is the weightage of this chapter? One question. Okay, one, though it will not be that every exam in the theory part there will be a question on peer review. But if there is a question, there will be a question of 4 to 5 marks. There will be one question. Okay, but what they did in one of the attempts, in the MCQ part of the paper, they made an integrated case study. Integrated case study means what? Case study is given, and after the case study, 5 questions are given of 2 marks each of 10 marks, and the entire integrated case study was prepared on peer review. You understand? So what can happen in the intermediate audit paper also? Okay, fraud ka chapter, entire the one integrated case study prepared totally on the fraud only, which can make it for 10 marks. Right? So that is something exceptional. Like that is also a possibility. Right? Normal 1 mark, 2 mark, correct, incorrect, and one question. This is our normal expectation. But what, like I told you, one exam, essay 500, 14 marks. Like essay 500, that one auditing standard had come for the 14 marks. Okay, right. So anyways, what are we talking about over here is the auditor's responsibilities relating to fraud in an audit of the financial statements. Okay, right. So each standard, we also have the original text of these standards, right? Each standard on auditing, do we have the original text of the standard on auditing? So say if I come to the text of essay 240, right? A standard which is of 48 pages, right? So all this 48 pages over there, and then in the 48 pages, if I come over here to this objectives of essay 240, are you with me? Right? The objectives of essay 240. Can you read it? The objectives of the auditor are to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement in the financial statements due to fraud. Okay. To obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence about the assessed risks of material misstatement due to fraud through designing and implementing appropriate responses, and to respond appropriately to identified or suspected fraud. Okay. What is your observation? Okay, further? Because 240, na, it is only talking about fraud. So fraud though is going to be mentioned over there. So that I understand. But what is your observation? Essay? And 3 best friends, no? 450. Identified misstatement. What is the title of 450? Evaluation of misstatements identified during the audit. Here, instead of identifying a misstatement, I am saying it is an identified fraud. So, to add this due to fraud, fraud not been there. It was nothing but 315, 330, 450. Because identify and assess the RMM, to obtain evidence about the assessed RMM through designing and implementing the responses, and then to respond to the appropriately to the identified misstatement. Then it would have been what? 315, 330 and 450. But because it is due to fraud, that is why we come to essay 240. Are you understanding that? So can I so say that we are discussing essay 315, 330, 450 for fraud in 240. We are discussing essay 315, 330, 450, but because it is due to fraud, we discuss it in 240. Best way to understand this, like say example Shopper Stop or Lifestyle or any multi-brand outlet, right? Do you get multiple brands over there? Like 100 brands, 200 brands under one roof, do you get over there? Like in Shopper Stop, do you get Levi's? In Shopper Stop is one of that. There are many other brands over there, but I'm just taking an example. Okay, in Shopper Stop, do you get Levi's? Is it one of the brand which you get over there? Yes. But if I go to the MG Road or to the high street of a particular city, there I will find an exclusive Levi's outlet. You understand? Now, when if I go to the Levi's outlet, there will I find any Louis Philippe or Van Heusen or any other collection over there? No, there I will only find the Levi's. But in Shoppers Stop, can I find Louis Philippe and Van Heusen and Arrow and all these brands together under one roof? Right. So 315, 330, 450 is like Shoppers Stop. And 240 is like Levi's outlet. You understand? So what is discussed in 240? Arey, give me good answer. What we are discussing in 240, is it covered in 315, 330, 450? What we are discussing in 240, is that covered in 315, 330, 450? Yes. In Levi's outlet, are you getting Levi's jeans? Yes. But in Shoppers Stop also, are you getting Levi's jeans? Yes. So is it there in 315, 330, 450 also? Yes. 315, 330, 450 wholesale. It is talking about all misstatements. The misstatement can be due to fraud. It could be due to related parties. It could be due to your going concern. It could be due to the subsequent events. It is say in my audit, if I identify 10 RMM, then 315, 330, 450 is talking about all the 10 RMM. But if I come to SA 240, it is only and only talking about the RMM and the responses and the reporting relating to fraud. Then when I come to SA 550, it is only and only talking about the risk response relating to related parties. Like say when I come to 250, it is only and only talking about the risk relating to the compliance with the laws and regulations. So what you understand from this? Okay, one, wholesale standard 315, 330, 450. But we also have the exclusive standards. Right? But we also have the exclusive standards. Are you able to follow this, everyone? Okay. Right. Now we come to the $1 million question over there. What is the $1 million question? Okay, whether detection of fraud or error, is it the duty of an auditor? Detection of fraud and error, is it the duty of an auditor? I am appointed as an auditor of Growth Limited. What is my objective of audit? To express an opinion on the true and fair view of the financial statements for year ended 31st March 2026. On 25th April, on 25th April 26, I issued an independent audit report saying that financial statements give a true and fair view. On 25th of May, yes, a big fraud was revealed, which had taken place in Growth Limited. Can they catch the collar of the auditor? Auditor, what you did, how you said true and fair, year 2000 fraud in the company, what did you do, on what basis you are saying true and fair? Can they catch the collar of the auditor? Yes? Then no, okay? Material तो होगा ना 2000 crore, big amount. Can they catch? Auditor, jail, imprisonment. How you come for audit, say I want tea, I want coffee, you didn't detect fraud, what were you doing? Go to jail. Okay, now auditor says, okay, fraud has happened. You say that I did audit, I said true and fair, now 2000 crore fraud happened. Okay, what auditor says? What is the defense of the auditor? What auditor needs to prove? That whether he exercised the reasonable care and skill in the performance of his duties. Right, whether the auditor exercised professional competence and due care. So again, coming back to my question, okay, is detection of fraud and error, is it the duty of the auditor? No. What do we say? Right? Detection. Write down with me. Detection of the fraud or error, is it the duty of the auditor? What we say? Look at our answer. We don't say no. No, we don't say incorrect. We don't say anything. They ask, nahi, depends me nahi, ruko. They ask detection of fraud and error. Is it the duty of the auditor? Right? What you say? Detection of fraud or error is the primary responsibility of the management. Then they say, auditor, tell about you now. Is it your responsibility? Auditor says, wait, listen to me. What does it say? The objective of the auditor is to obtain a reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. And our auditor is behaving like an advocate over here. And not directly saying yes or no, proving his case over here. Then they say, Arey auditor, but tell me no. Okay, is detection of fraud and error your duty? He says, due to the, very good, due to the inherent limitations of an audit, there is an unavoidable risk that some material misstatements may not be detected, even though if the audit has been planned and performed in accordance with the standards on auditing. They say, auditor, is detection of fraud and error your duty? He says, I am telling you what? Fraud is more difficult to detect than error. Then they ask, auditor, is detection of fraud and error your duty? He says, management fraud is more difficult to detect than employee fraud. They say, auditor, is detection of fraud and error your duty? What does it say? I exercised, yes, reasonable care and skill in the performance of my duties as an auditor. They said, auditor, is detection of fraud and error your duty? He says, I remain alert. I maintain an attitude of professional skepticism throughout the audit. Now, they are saying, auditor, but we asked you, okay, is detection of fraud and error your duty? He says, now, whatever you want to understand from this, but what justification I wanted to give from my side, I have given you. Right? Okay, it is the responsibility, primary responsibility of the management. Objective of auditor is to obtain reasonable assurance. Then we say, okay, due to the inherent limitations of an audit, there is an unavoidable risk, right? If I come, you'll start writing. Before that, only start writing. Anyways, I'm going to come. Yes, due to the inherent limitations of an audit, there is an unavoidable risk. What? That some material misstatements may not be detected, even though if the audit has been planned and performed in accordance with the essays. Then what does he say? Fraud is more difficult to detect than error. Management fraud is more difficult to detect than the employee fraud. Then what does he say? That I did my work with reasonable care and skill. I remained alert, yes, throughout the audit. I maintained an attitude of the professional skepticism. Okay. Right, detection of fraud and error. Is it the duty of the auditor? Right, detection of fraud or error. Whose responsibility we say it is? Management. So management, right, fraud is ethical or unethical? Fraud is unethical. So if management want to prevent the occurrence of a fraud, yes, if they don't want a fraud to happen, what they need to introduce? A culture of honesty and ethical behavior, where we had studied it in the control environment. CRISM ka first point, you remember, appropriate foundation, it control consciousness, sets the tone in the organization. Right, so control environment, right? So that is the responsibility of the management. Are you understanding that? Yes, so what is the first question which we study in this chapter of the fraud? Okay, is detection of fraud and error, is it the duty of the auditor? No. Is, what do we say? It is the primary responsibility of the management. Then what is the objective of the auditor? What is the primary objective of the auditor? To obtain the reasonable assurance. What reasonable assurance? Right, that the financial statements are free from material misstatement, right? So chapter number 5. And what does it say in chapter number 5 over here? Okay, detection of fraud and error. Is it the duty of an auditor? No. What do we say? Again, this part has been asked as a retail question in your exams. Right? It is the primary responsibility of the management. Management has to place a strong emphasis on the fraud prevention, reduce the opportunities for fraud to take place, and fraud deterrence, which could persuade individuals not to commit fraud because of the likelihood of detection and the punishment. And what does it say? They need to create a culture of the honesty and the ethical behavior. Right? Then what is the objective of the auditor? To obtain the reasonable assurance that financial statements are free from material misstatement. Then there is an unavoidable risk that some material misstatements may not be detected. Okay, right. Then what does it say? If you come to know about a fraud, what does it say? The auditor also has the responsibility to communicate the misstatement to the appropriate level of the management and consider the need to report to TCWG. He may also obtain the legal advice before reporting on the information or before withdrawing from the engagement. The auditor should satisfy himself that the effect of fraud is properly reflected in the financial information, and in case if he performs the modified procedures to confirm the existence of the fraud. The auditor should consider the implications of the fraud and error and frame his report appropriately. In case of a fraud, the same should be disclosed in the financial statements, and if disclosure is not made in the financial statements, he should make a disclosure in the audit report. This is the very simple funda of the auditor. What he does, he tells management, you disclose. Okay, you have done a fraud during the year. Disclose it in your financial statements. If they disclose, auditor says okay. They say we will not disclose. Then auditor says I will disclose in the audit report. Right, then I will mention about it in the audit report. Then what does it say? The risk of not detecting a material misstatement from fraud is higher than the risk of not detecting one from error. So simple language, what we have written over here, fraud is more difficult to detect than an error. Why is fraud more difficult to detect than an error? Because fraud may involve what? Sophisticated. What does fraud involve? It may involve the sophisticated and the carefully organized schemes, right? Everything is planned when they do a fraud, right? So sophisticated and the carefully organized schemes designed to hide it, to conceal it. And what are the schemes which they do? They do the forgery. What is forgery? Unauthorized changes. Deliberate failure to record transaction means what? Omission. So one, forgery, unauthorized changes. Second, deliberate failure to record the transaction or the intentional misrepresentations being made to the auditor. Auditor is asking, are there any litigations going on against the company? They say, no, auditor, no litigations are going on. Right? So intentional misrepresentations being made to the auditor. Right? So this is super favorite again for the correct incorrect. Right? Fraud is more difficult to detect than an error. Why? Because fraud involves sophisticated and the carefully organized schemes designed to conceal it, such as the forgery, the deliberate failure to record the transactions, or the intentional misrepresentations being made to the auditor. Such attempts at concealment may even be more difficult to detect when accompanied by collusion, and collusion may cause the auditor to believe that the evidence is persuasive when in fact it is false. Right? Why? Because the people have participated. They've signed the wrong invoice and all. So auditor thinks that controls have been followed, but in effect they have not been followed. Right? So auditor believes the evidence to be persuasive, but actually it is the false evidence. Are you able to follow this? What does it say? Fraud is more difficult to detect than an error. Why? Because fraud involves sophisticated and the carefully organized schemes designed to hide it. What are the schemes? Forgery, deliberate failure to record the transactions, intentional misrepresentations being made to the auditor, and it is further difficult to detect if it is accompanied by the collusion. Then the auditor's ability to detect a fraud depends upon the skillfulness of the perpetrator. If that fellow did not, keep a proper record, right? What do you say? Did not, he left some evidences after he did the fraud. Right, so what does it say? The skillfulness of the perpetrator, the frequency and the extent of the manipulation, the degree of the collusion involved, and the relative size of the individual amounts manipulated, and the seniority of the individuals involved. Right, so again, can this be a correct and incorrect question? Yes. Right, the ability of the auditor to detect fraud depends upon the skillfulness, that how carefully the fraud was done, that nobody could find out how it was done. Then the frequency and extent of the manipulation, then how much was the collusion, then the size of the individual amounts manipulated, and the seniority of the individuals. An auditor may be able to identify the potential opportunities for fraud to be perpetrated. It is difficult for the auditor to determine whether a misstatement such as an accounting, in judgment areas such as accounting estimate, are they done by fraud or error. So auditor can think, hey, this area there can be a fraud. But actually whether there is a fraud or so, accounting estimate, whether the estimate is wrong due to fraud or whether due to error, it says that is difficult for the auditor to determine. Right, so whether by mistake they did the wrong provision or intentionally they did the wrong provision, it says it is difficult for the auditor to determine. Okay, right, so we take a break and then we complete with the chapter.